Now, ornament is of course, a totally historically correct subject, right? But thank God I'm not in a historically correct book, so that makes it interesting. Now, the notion of ornament, in the way I'm discussing it, is really different than let's say language theory or postmodern semiotics. The whole sort of notion of communication and meaning is really the worst, the darkest cloud that's been hanging over the 20th century is that of the linguistic turn. That's for sure. So if we just kick out language for a moment and then try to think what ornament is, it suddenly becomes much more difficult to understand. First, we have to understand that in the 19th century, there was like two trends slowly splitting apart. They were both dealing with ornament. One was a group around the famous theoretician of ornament who wrote the Grammar of Ornament, which is Owen Jones. And the other is much closer to John Ruskin, which is William Morris. Now, normally you would think like they're very close in the Victorian age, and that's just like a battle between, let's say, the Oxford School of Ruskin and the South Kensington School of Owen Jones. But it's much deeper, and lots of people have actually suggested that Owen Jones and this whole notion of what is called tessellation, that means there's a subdividing of a surface into a pattern. And that can be a pattern of hexagons, of diamonds, or of squares, like we know from our tiled bathrooms or something. And this is an ordered system. And the other is much more complex. That's the vine system of William Morris, so to speak. So one is line-based, the other is sort of surface-based. But there has actually been people that have been discussing this whole notion that actually the basis of modernism, of Mondrian, people like Mondrian and Malevich, is not in Cézanne or in Monet or in actually the fine arts, but actually in the applied arts. And there's very good arguments for that. So from Owen Jones, we get modernism. Why is that? Because we get this purified notion of the object. It becomes a pure, ordered, informational thing. And the perception of it is what Gombrich calls the sense of order. Can you imagine? So you're looking at something, you're not like, you don't feel a sense of beauty, you don't feel anything, you're just like recalculating the ordered system. It's an informational notion, which they call Gestalt, right? Which is a nightmare. It is a complete nightmare because we, as feeling bodies, as aesthetic bodies, we're suddenly forced to sort of decode this whole thing. Now, modernism basically, as a whole, is based on that, right? So my matter of ornament actually comes from this notion of Morris, which is much more complex, much more about entwining, about entangling. There you get the word again, about interlacing. There's this whole notion of something that is not in order. That doesn't mean it's deconstructed or that it's a failed notion of order, but there's a beauty to it, right? So the one is going straight into the confinements of the sublime, and the other is going into a sense of beauty. So there's this thing about ornament that makes it opening up a whole world of feeling that we haven't heard of in 120 years. Right? Because in the late 19th century, we were all discussing Einfühlung, right? How you feel into something, how you would sympathize with an object. Sympathy was not then at that time psychologized, right? It was not something between you and your dog, or between you and your neighbor, but actually between you and a vase, or between you and a cloud or a mountain, right? The famous example of Ruskin that I'm using is this mountain. He's looking at it, he sees the pattern emerge, and he shares his life sympathetically with that mountain. So there's this whole notion of bodies that feel and how they relate to each other that is expressed by ornament. So it is also a notion that goes directly against the whole basis of modernism, which is a purification of the object. Modernism, Bauhaus, right, which eradicated the ornament, right? It's almost like a colonialism, right? Where you would have Adolf Loos. He wrote this famous book, Ornament und Verbrechen. This is ornament and crime. You read that book, you see it starts with ornament and it ends with tattoos of criminals on death row, right? Why do they have all these ornaments? Yeah, because they're close to crime, right? So ornament and crime are very much related. Very much related. Now, that clearly, at the end of what I'm writing is actually that Loos is the criminal, right? With him, this whole politics of cleaning up and purification started. And it's also a way trying to rethink ornament without, let's say, the whole range of postmodernism, because we have been trying to get ornament back into aesthetics, but that's always as this sort of semiotic little thing that's added to the object, right, just to make the masses happy. So I'm trying to open up a new sense of ornament, and we put in the book some fabulous artworks by Wim Delvoye and Tord Boontje. And what is actually the most interesting, if you see the work of Tord Boontje, it's basically fretwork. Right? Fretwork is an ornamental form that you would only see in folklore. Right? You go to northern Russia, they would do fretwork by a handsaw, and they would decorate their houses, their wooden houses with it. And he's using that technique, but without the handsaw. It's a sort of dark ornament. It's really a sort of strange notion that you see all these deer, all these lovely birds and flowers. And in that sense, he is connected to Morris. But it's all made by machines. It's designed on a computer and it's made by a computer. So suddenly we get this notion of craft and of detail and of feeling and of attachment to object, which is really made by machines. And I think that in the work of both Delvoye and that of Boontje, you see that sort of strange mergence of technology and ornament.